Let me start with a question. What would you do if someone tried to control your life, your home, and your land, even though they had zero authority over you? You'd probably laugh, right? Well, I laughed too, at first. But then, this so-called neighbor decided to make it personal. And when I say personal, I mean she dragged me into a courtroom for rules that didn't even apply to me. But here's the twist. 3 minutes into the hearing, it was her world that started to crumble. It all began when I bought a piece of property just outside the boundary of a gated community called Silver Pines Estates. It was the kind of neighborhood where the grass was trimmed to exactly 2 inches, mailboxes all matched like they'd been cloned, and you could practically smell the HOA rules floating in the air. I chose my lot specifically because it was outside the HOA's jurisdiction. No dues, no architectural approval for every nail I hammered, and no busybodies deciding if my porch furniture was community appropriate. For the first few weeks, life was perfect. I was building a shed, fixing up my garden, and enjoying the peace. Then one afternoon, while I was unloading plywood from my truck, I heard the sound of heels clacking against my gravel driveway. I turned, and there she was, Karen. Short, bleach-blonde hair, sunglasses big enough to cover half her face, and an expression like she'd just stepped in something foul. "Excuse me," she said, not even offering her name. "You'll need to file an exterior improvement request before building that structure." I blinked at her. I'm not in your HOA. She smiled in that way people do when they're about to say something unbelievably arrogant. "Well, technically, this is still part of our community," I laughed. "Technically, it's not. County records say otherwise. My property is outside your boundary line." Her smile tightened into a thin, angry line. "We'll see about that." From that moment, Karen was like a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd find HOA newsletters stuffed in my mailbox, violation notices taped to my door, and once, believe it or not, a warning about unauthorized plant growth. She even left a pamphlet about the dangers of non-compliant architectural colors in my driveway. I ignored her, thinking she'd eventually get bored. But ignoring a Karen is like waving a red flag in front of a bull. It only made her more determined. One Tuesday morning, I opened my mailbox and found a thick envelope from a law firm. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but when I opened it, my jaw dropped. The HOA, led by Karen, was officially suing me for violating their bylaws. I stared at the papers, baffled. How do you sue someone for breaking rules that don't even apply to them? I called the law firm, convinced it was some mistake. The secretary on the other end said, "Sir, we have instructions from the HOA president to proceed. She claims your property is subject to their regulations under a recent boundary amendment." A boundary amendment? That was a new one. I looked it up. Turns out Karen had pushed the HOA board to vote on expanding their jurisdiction, without recording it with the county, without notifying me, and without any legal authority whatsoever. It was like me deciding to declare my driveway part of France. Sounds official, but means nothing. At that point, I wasn't even mad. I was impressed at the level of delusion. But the thing is, I wasn't just some random homeowner. I'd worked in real estate law for years. I knew exactly what she was doing, and exactly how to end it. For the next few weeks, I prepared my case. It didn't take long. Most of it was just printing county maps, pulling up my deed, and highlighting the recorded HOA plat that clearly showed their boundaries ending a good 100 yards before my property line. When the court date arrived, I walked in wearing a plain suit and carrying a single manila envelope. Karen, on the other hand, showed up like she was leading a parade. She had a massive binder stuffed with photos of my property, laminated copies of HOA bylaws, and 2 board members in tow as her witnesses. She even smiled smugly when she saw me, as if she'd already won. The judge asked her to speak first. She launched into this long, self-righteous speech about protecting property values and upholding community standards. She waved around photos of my shed, my garden, even my mailbox, as if these were crimes against humanity. Then it was my turn. I walked up to the bench, handed the judge my property deed, and said, "Your Honor, this document, along with the county's recorded plat, clearly shows my property is outside the HOA boundaries. The HOA's attempt to extend its reach was never legally recorded, making this lawsuit baseless." Karen tried to interrupt, claiming there was a newly expanded map. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Did you file this expansion with the county and provide notice to the affected property owner?" Karen froze. "Well, no, but—" Case dismissed, just like that. It had taken less than 3 minutes for the judge to toss her entire case out the window. But here's where it got better. The judge ordered Karen and the HOA to reimburse me for my legal costs. I could see the color drain from her face as the reality sank in. She had dragged me to court thinking she'd win easily, and instead, she was now paying me. When I walked out of that courtroom, I thought it was over. But I didn't realize yet. Karen wasn't done. And what happened next would take this neighborhood feud to a whole new level, one where she wouldn't just lose in court, she'd lose everything. You'd think after being embarrassed in court and forced to pay my legal fees, Karen would have crawled back into whatever suburban cave she came from. But no. If anything, that defeat only made her more dangerous. It started small. One morning, I woke up to find my trash cans tipped over, garbage strewn across the yard. I cleaned it up, figuring it was raccoons. The next week, I got a letter from the county about unregistered livestock on my property, which was hilarious because the only animals I owned were 2 lazy cats who couldn't be bothered to chase a mouse, let alone run a black market. Goat farm. I knew exactly who was behind it, but without proof, it was just suspicion. And suspicion doesn't hold up in court. Karen's game plan was clear. Make my life miserable until I either sold the property or bent the knee to her precious HOA. Well, she picked the wrong guy. I decided to fight back. Not with petty revenge, but with patience, planning, and cold, hard evidence. I installed motion-activated security cameras around my property, hidden in places no one would notice. Every letter, every inspector visit, every odd occurrence, I wrote it all down in a detailed log. I even documented the timestamps when she would drive slowly past my house, staring at it like she was memorizing every blade of grass. It didn't take long before my cameras caught gold. Karen, in the dead of night, spray painting the word "eyesore" on the side of my fence. She was wearing a hoodie, but the cameras caught her face clearly when she looked up to check for traffic. There it was, my smoking gun. I could have gone straight to the police with that footage, but I wanted more. See, I had a hunch there was more to Karen's reign of terror than just personal vendettas, so I started digging into the HOA's finances. And oh boy, I hit the jackpot. Through public records requests, I got my hands on the HOA's expense reports. And guess what? Karen had been treating the HOA's bank account like her personal piggy bank. There were charges for spa treatments, salon visits, fancy dinners, and my favorite, a weekend trip to Las Vegas, all filed under community improvement. That wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. I compiled everything into a neat little packet, printed copies, and mailed one to every single homeowner in Silver Pines Estates. I didn't sign my name, of course. I wanted the chaos to unfold without a trace back to me, and unfold it did. Within days, the neighborhood was in uproar. Homeowners started demanding emergency meetings. Some of the same board members who'd backed Karen's lawsuit were now calling for her resignation. I'd see small groups of neighbors standing in the street, whispering and shaking their heads. Karen stopped driving by my property. For a while, I thought maybe she'd gone quiet for good. But then, one afternoon, I caught her on my driveway, again, this time screaming about betrayal and false accusations. She had a printout of the HOA expenses in her hand, shaking it at me like it was a weapon. That was her final mistake. See, by this point, I'd already filed for a restraining order based on the harassment, vandalism, and the video evidence. And by showing up on my driveway, she violated it. I didn't yell back. I didn't threaten her. I simply pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. Within 15 minutes, a patrol car pulled up. The deputies didn't even need to hear my side. One look at the restraining order was enough. Karen was cuffed on the spot. She tried to argue, but the officers weren't having it. They put her in the back of the cruiser, and for the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked small. The fallout was glorious. She was removed as HOA president within a week. Word spread fast about the misuse of funds, and the county began its own investigation into possible embezzlement. Some neighbors were angry at me, sure, but most were just relieved someone had finally stood up to her. And me? I was free. My land, my home, my life, untouched by her petty rules and her power trips. I sat on my porch the morning after her arrest, sipping coffee, watching the sunrise. My fence was clean, my mailbox upright, and for the first time in months, there was peace. The moral? Some people think rules give them power, but the law, the real law, doesn't play favorites. And if you ever find yourself up against an HOA Karen, remember, you don't have to yell. You don't have to stoop to their level. You just have to know how to bury them legally before they even realize they've already lost.